I'm Kelly McKay Semler. I'm in the Department of Communication Studies here on the campus of University of South Dakota, and I'm here to talk with you today about intercultural communication. Anthropologists estimate that modern humans have been around for a long time, about 200,000 years, and for most of human history, people were born, lived, and died in one geographical area. Everything they ate, the tools they used, the clothes they wore, and the beliefs they shared were produced locally by people they had known for most of their lives. Athens, Greece, around the time of Socrates, about 2,400 years ago, was one of the world's largest cities, yet the entire population of Athens at that time could fit into a couple of modern-day skyscrapers. Alexander the Great conquered the known world with 30 to 40,000 soldiers in his army, roughly the number of people who commute daily into cities like Des Moines, Iowa. It was less than 2,000 years ago that Rome became the first city to reach 1 million people. Even once we started to live in large-scale societies, though, most people still had very little contact with members of other cultures. It has only been in the last couple centuries that we have been drawn into what Marshall McLuhan characterized as the global village, as the result of rapid expansion of worldwide transportation and communication networks. Our human nature was shaped, however, for nearly 200,000 years of human history in small-scale societies. Although we no longer inhabit communities untouched by diversity, human nature remains rooted in a fundamental sense of uncertainty and anxiety when it comes to communicating with strangers, or those whom we perceive to be unfamiliar or unlike us. In this introduction to the study of intercultural communication, there are a few key terms to become familiar with. First is the distinction between in-groups and out-groups. At the most basic level of human social organization, our in-groups are the people with whom we identify, that are important to us, and for which we will make sacrifices. In contrast, the groups of people with whom we are taught not to associate are referred to as out-groups. Culture has been defined in over 100 different ways by scholars across disciplines, but generally speaking, we can say that culture is a system of shared meaning among a group of people. This doesn't mean, however, that everyone has the exact same understanding of the cultural code they share, only that among culture members there's enough shared meaning that members are able to easily coordinate their understanding with one another. Regardless of how culture is defined, one thing is clear. Culture is learned and transmitted through communication. The term intercultural communication is used inclusively to refer to any interaction that takes place between people who perceive they belong to different groups. This can include, for example, different nationalities, ethnicities, races, genders, generations, disabled, non-disabled, and many other group identities. It is important to remember, though, that the underlying process of intercultural communication, that is, communicating with strangers, is the same as communication with people we perceive to be in our in-groups. The difference is one of degree, not kind. In other words, it can be more challenging, but fundamentally, when we communicate with out-group members, we go through the same process of meaning creation as we do when we communicate with in-group members. The concept of the stranger is an interesting one. Sociologist George Simmel observed about strangers that they are at the same time far and near. Physically, we experience the stranger as being in our presence, physically close to where we are. But psychologically, we experience strangers as being worlds apart from us. They may not speak our language, they may dress differently than we do, and they may act differently than how we've been taught to act. A stranger is a figure-ground concept, though, meaning that a stranger is defined in relation to a native cultural member or existing group. For example, in Norway, I am a stranger to the Norwegian culture and people, but a Norwegian is the stranger when visiting the U.S. The degree of strangeness we experience when we interact with someone exists on a continuum of the familiar to the strange. While in-group members feel highly familiar to us, the more differences between out-group members and ourselves, the more dissimilar and strange they seem to us. As Harman observed, in our increasingly globalized world, strangeness is no longer a temporary condition to be overcome, but a way of life. The expert navigator of the cultural world is one who may fit in anywhere by being acutely aware of the cultural nuances. In your lifetimes, many of you will be routinely called upon to be expert navigators of different cultural worlds. Thus, it is important for you to learn strategies for communicating effectively with diverse kinds of strangers. Understanding anxiety uncertainty management theory is a good place to start in preparing yourself to become an effective communicator in intercultural encounters. Posited by William Goody-Kunst, this theory has the core assumption that we experience some degree of uncertainty and anxiety in any interaction we have with others. We are wondering what the other person thinks of us, what we think of them and their intentions, what the outcome of the interaction will be, etc. Although the concepts are closely related, uncertainty and anxiety are distinct experiences. Uncertainty is a cognitive response to being unable to predict what the other person will do or how they will react to us, whereas anxiety is the emotional response we have to fearing negative outcomes of the interaction. Again, although we experience some degree of uncertainty and anxiety in any encounter, we tend to be more anxious and uncertain when communicating with strangers, especially those we perceive to be very different from us. Goody-Kunst also observed that our levels of uncertainty and anxiety are really high. We are unable to communicate effectively because we are too busy trying to control our fear. Interestingly, however, we are also ineffective when our levels of uncertainty and anxiety are too low. This is because when we are so confident that we can predict others' communication, what they'll say and how they will react to what we are saying, we get lazy and stop paying close attention to others. This belief that we can perfectly predict others, however, is false, and as a result, we become ineffective communicators because we stop listening and paying close attention. This chart provides a graphic illustration of the process of managing our uncertainty and anxiety over time in a relationship. As we first meet a stranger, our uncertainty level is high. We get to know them a bit more, however, and we realize we have some things in common, and our uncertainty decreases. They may say something, however, that causes our uncertainty to spike again, but we stick with it, and pretty soon we feel more confident that we are beginning to know and understand this person better. Over time, there are ups and downs, but the extreme highs become less and less common. As relationships develop, we risk falling below our minimum thresholds when we stop listening because we assume we know what the other person is thinking and saying. The point is that in order to be maximally effective in our communication with strangers, we have to manage our uncertainty and anxiety so that it is neither too high, because then we operate mindlessly according to the stereotypes we have about strangers, nor too low, because then we aren't paying attention and we will miss something. Other factors besides uncertainty and anxiety that we study in intercultural communication include the role that context plays in shaping how messages are sent and received. Contexts include the individual communicators themselves, as we all come into any encounter with our own set of beliefs and stereotypes. This layer in the model is called the psychocultural level. Another context is the sociocultural factors involved, which includes our group memberships that are guiding our communication in any given interaction. The next context is the cultural level, which refers to the broader national cultural beliefs individuals are raised in. Surrounding these three layers is the environment in which the communication takes place. For example, whether the interaction is in someone's home or in Times Square on New Year's Eve will affect the communication. All of these layers of context must be considered in order to understand why an interaction between two people took the direction that it did. So in review, intercultural communication is not different from the interactions we have with in-group members in kind, only in the degree of challenge it presents. Fundamentally, people of all backgrounds share many similarities. We can use communication to discover them and appreciate our differences. To communicate effectively, we have to manage our uncertainty and anxiety, maintaining levels that are neither too high nor too low. And finally, our communication is influenced by several layers of context, including our culture, our sociocultural identities, our psychocultural traits and beliefs, and the environment in which the interaction is taking place.